In the spring of 1987, Cannon Films released Over the Top, the first of 3 movies that year meant to propel them from a second-rate studio into the top tier of the film industry. The plan was for a sports-based action film led by Sylvester Stallone to get the ball rolling, then take over the summer blockbuster season with the 1-2 punch of Superman 4, The Quest for Peace, and Masters of the Universe. All 3 flopped, effectively putting Cannon out of business and closing the door on the Golden Globus era of cinematic history. But as something of a consolation prize, every so often a flop goes on to become a cult classic, finding a fan base further on down the road. This has become the case with a good many Cannon Films disasters, including Over the Top and to a lesser degree Masters of the Universe. I've still never met anyone that likes Superman 4, but that's neither here nor there. Today I'm breaking down Over the Top. My reviews look at context, storyline, characters, world building, and themes. I'm Dr. Balthazar, thanks for the view, and thanks for the request to review this one. You don't have to ask me twice to get in on some Golden Globus canon. Let's get to it. For context, Cannon Films produced and/or distributed movies from 1967 and 1994, but the Golden Globus era through the 80s is when they really distinguished themselves with a torrent of B-movies. As the decade was beginning to wind down, the studio was on shaky financial ground, and was maybe tired of being viewed as the crappy, campy, trashy studio the rest of the film industry laughed at and looked down on. Everyone wants to be respected by their peers on some level, no judgment there. Now say what you will about Golden Globus, and I do in plenty of my reviews, but those dildos were never afraid to bet on themselves. Since money and respect were at the heart of the matter, they said, okay, instead of limiting our spending and playing to whatever we believe our strengths to be, let's get the Titanic turned away from the iceberg by exponentially increasing our spending on talent, IPs, and production.
Everything burns.
It can be a fine line between genius and madman. Maybe in some alternate reality, the Hail Mary approach would have worked, and who knows how movies would be different today if it did. But it didn't. Although that's how you have Sylvester Stallone in a pair of Cannon Films at the height of his drawing power, by virtue of a paycheck that went over the top. Another contextual point is that Cannon did some interesting cross-promotional work on this one, creating action figures and bankrolling an arm wrestling tournament not unlike the one we see in the movie. Winner takes home the keys to a big rig and everything. John Brzenk won that one since he was pulling everyone on the planet in the mid-80s. They also gave him a brief cameo in the film. Cannon seemed to genuinely believe arm wrestling was about to take off in the US for reasons only Golden Globus could explain, if they are capable of explaining anything, although I've never seen the evidence to suggest they could. The storyline opens with a father and his semi and his son at a military academy. Golden Globus were Israeli, and their grasp of American culture was tenuous at best. In the US, military academies tend to be more punitive measures for unruly children than what the film is going for, which was to introduce a salt-of-the-earth working-class absentee father and a spoiled brat yuppie-type son who would go on a journey of discovery and transformation that brought them together. So Suspenders picks up Bratface at the school, and they set out across country to meet up with Mom before she goes into a surgery of some kind. The villains are then introduced, an affluent father-in-law who had been the surrogate father to Bratface, and an arm wrestler Suspenders is destined to lock up with at the National Arm Wrestling Championship later that week.
I turn the head around us like a switch.
Some arm wrestling and relationship building takes place as the journey continues, and Bratface gets in on some arm wrestling drama of his own. Father-in-law of the Year tries to have some of his goons kidnap his grandson in order to crowbar in something of an action set piece, which would have landed everyone involved in a prison cell. The boys eventually get themselves to LA, only to discover Mom has died on the operating table. Did they not get there in time, or was the procedure something that had a low probability of an adverse outcome and things just went wrong? Well, anyway, Suspenders and Father-in-law of the Year get into some shit, and we quietly have one of the most astoundingly stupid plot decisions in the entire movie, which is saying a lot given that we're talking about a Cannon film about arm wrestling. Suspenders agrees to sign over custody of his son for reasons that are cloudy at best, although it's implied that he doesn't have the financial means by which to pay for a protracted legal battle. He then heads to Vegas for the Arm Wrestling Championship of the Americas, where he sells his truck and gambles his entire life savings to pay for the protracted legal battle he's not going to take on, since he already signed over custody.
That's what I call gambling.
Bratface then discovers cards and letters Suspenders sent him over the years that he never received, which the film clumsily forgot to associate with the Father-in-law of the Year by placing them in the belongings of the dead mother. So I guess Mom is just a colossal dick. That's too bad. Regardless, Bratface makes his way to Vegas, where all roads meet for the Arm Wrestling Championship of the Northern Hemisphere. The tournament montages its way through some opening rounds, and we have a confused confrontation between Suspenders and Father-in-law of the Year, which even the main protagonist can't figure out the rationale for.
I gave you custody of the boy. I signed papers. What more do you want?
Fair question. We then get back to dudes pulling dudes with the occasional slow-mo for dramatic effect until Suspenders goes over the top to pull some dude to win the tournament, the love of his son, and the begrudging respect of both his rival and father-in-law. Roll credits. for characters that start with the main protagonist, Lincoln Hawk, played by Sylvester Stallone. Sly goes for a really understated and soft-spoken approach, and when you can actually hear the dialogue, more often than not, it's insane.
I always wanted to be a milkshake.
But for any fan of the movie, the turning around of the hat thing is strangely iconic.
I just try to take my hat and I turn it around, and it's like a switch.
He goes from an absentee father to one that accepts the responsibility of being a parent, so there's a bit of character growth there. Forgiveness and redemption are decent central concepts, and the fact that he took responsibility for his past decisions without being able to clearly account for them
All I can say, Mike, is I made a mistake. I know that.
is 100% more identifiable for an audience than some elaborate rationalization about how nothing was really his fault, and actually he's somehow the victim, which is how modern writers approach so-called redemption arcs. See James Gunn's Creature Commandos for a masterclass on that sort of thing. Well, no, don't do that. Don't watch that show. It's unendurable. Just take my word for it. Modern storytellers are allergic to characters that admit to making mistakes, taking personal responsibility, or redeeming themselves in some way. The preference being they were right all along, just misunderstood or discriminated against because writers tend to project. The role of Michael Hawke was played by David Mendenhall, and I kind of make it a standing rule not to rip on child actors. Let's just say the character needed to go from being an unlikable brat to an endearing kid, and it's not easy for child actors to be both of those things, and just leave it at that. There's a bit of consideration given to cause and effect that I like. Suspenders teaches the boy how to drive, so later in the movie, the audience has a reason to accept why a 12-year-old can drive. Logic is good. Logic is your friend. It also kind of works that the lead teaches a lesson about trying your best regardless of whether you win or lose.
As long as you lose like a winner, it doesn't matter, because you did it with dignity.
Which the boy internalizes and returns to him as the finale of the Arm Wrestling Championship of the World approaches.
It doesn't matter if you win or lose, Dad.
So, okay, there's more than nothing going on here for character development. That's something. The wife/mother, played by Susan Blakely, was a bit of a curiosity. She seemed to know the end was nigh, but if she was going into surgery with a high probability of a bad outcome, she wouldn't have done so before the boys arrived at the hospital, and yet that's the direction they went. Maybe if they clarified how routine the procedure was and what an unexpected development her death had been, it would have made more sense. Or maybe the boys could have gotten to her before the surgery for a family scene that reinforced her desire for them to have a relationship. But hey, Canon Films, what can you do?
But the switch goes on, I feel like another person.
The main antagonist was played by Robert Loggia, and his character was an almost in my book. The opposition to his son-in-law came from Suspenders being a deserter, which didn't necessarily mean he was a loser. It meant he didn't make an effort to try. Parenting in general is more about being present and doing your best and getting everything right. So that made some thematic sense. During the Arm Wrestling Championship of the Solar System, he offered Suspenders a new truck and some money to make a life separate from the rest of the family, which would have fed into the expectation that the guy was a quitter and would take an easy payoff rather than do his best in the competition. But Suspenders had already signed over custody, so there wasn't anything to be gained by the payoff, and he'd already proven a willingness to try by betting all his worldly possessions on himself and working through the opening rounds. The movie seemed to realize there was a breakdown of logic happening and called an audible by shifting the antagonist's motives from his son-in-law being a deserter to him not being a winner.
Michael will never go with you because you're a loser. You've always been a loser.
But had they clipped out the scene in which Lincoln Hawke signed over custody, everyone's decisions would have made sense entering the big finish. Relatively speaking, of course, this is a canon film we're talking about. The arm wrestling rival is played by an arm wrestler named Rick Zumwalt, and he also had a line or two that became iconic for whatever reason such things stick.
I drive, truck, break arms, and arm wrestle.
His character was associated with the notion of winning without regard to effort, while the lead was associated with trying regardless of whether you win or lose, which made sense until Suspenders signed over custody of his son, and they called that audible with character motives making winning the name of the game.
Being number one is everything. There is no second place. Second sucks.
So one of the villains ends up being the mouthpiece of the movie. Okay then. For world building, this is just a world where you gotta lose those sleeves there, amigo. It's a world of mild exaggeration. Nobody is going to pull John Brzenk in the opening rounds of an arm wrestling tournament or whip Terry Funk's ass in 1987. But truly impossible things aren't made possible for effect. One of the arm wrestlers eats a cigar and drinks motor oil, which, okay, person can't do that. But a few scenes later, he's taking antacids, so that was just a setup to a punchline. Okay, no shade there. Something that falls into the category of world building is during the Arm Wrestling Championship of the Galaxy, the movie shifts from the viewer's perspective at home to what an in-universe audience would be experiencing if the tournament was on television. It starts off with a montage and play-by-play announcer's voiceover. Then to build on the effect, they cut to vignettes that introduce the competitors. 2026's The Running Man tried a similar effect of flipping back and forth between an audience's perspective in and out of universe, and it felt off-putting and out of place, while Over the Top made it feel pretty seamless. Although it's difficult to imagine a world in which arm wrestling has universal appeal. I mean, I liked to arm wrestle when I was a kid or still drank at the bars. Allegedly, the outdoor bar at Harrah's Casino in Las Vegas.
That's what I call gambling.
You've always been a loser.
But sometimes a niche appeal is as much appeal as a thing is going to have.
I flip the switch and I feel like a truck.
For themes, a father seeking forgiveness from his son and redemption as a parent is fine. I'll take that over social messaging for the modern audience every day of the week and twice on Sunday. There's a passing notion that it takes a village to raise a child, and therefore one person isn't adequate to the task, no matter how sincerely they believe themselves to be.
You understand I'm all the family Micah will ever need.
As well as the idea that parenting is more about showing up and trying than winning and losing. But those things felt more like incidental contact and part of a coherent plan to develop thematic ideas on parenting. Kenny Loggins' contribution to the soundtrack is synonymous with the film, and sort of not really ties to a thematic message about the world being a challenging place.
The world meets nobody halfway.
The world meets nobody halfway.
The world beats nobody halfway.
But having established that, did the main character meet the challenge by doing his best regardless of whether he won or lost, or did the filmmakers lose all sense of how to bring the theme into the station and fixate on winning the arm wrestling championship of the universe as the answer to all life's questions? The answer is door number 2, although I wouldn't come down too hard on writer Sterling Silliphant, since Menahem Golan was the director, and there's a strong possibility he never actually read the script. In conclusion, the movie Over the Top is a cult classic because it's stupid fun, but a flop because it's canon films and that's just what they did best. Lincoln Hawk wasn't going to become another Rocky Balboa, since even a sports-obsessed country like the US has tiers of interest when it comes to sports, and arm wrestling exists on whatever the bottom one happens to be. Although I don't hate the basic premise. It's a quick contest of strength in which one makes absurd faces, and it's easier to translate to the silver screen than condensing a full sporting event into a handful of images. I suspect if a viewer likes the soundtrack, it has a pretty direct correlation to how they feel about the movie. Eddie Money, Sammy Hagar, Kenny Loggins, very 80s, you know? I'm probably going to have more copyright issues with the music than the footage when I try to publish this video, but YouTube, them's the breaks. For those that take an interest in arm wrestling, my prescription is a documentary, Pulling John. For those that like the concept of a father figure and son bonding on a road trip, the movie Dutch. And for those that want them some more canon film Stallone, Cobra is where it's at. I'm Dr. Baltazar, thanks for the view. Like what you like, don't you don't. It's all your call, Kemosabe. Yeah, SAI, hey, could you remove the sleeves from that picture of Dr. Baltazar? I was like, yeah, sure, no problem. I was like, oh, wow. Well, could you make me look good? And it was like,